The fire crackled merrily as Glimmer lay stretched out before it, the dancing flames making her skin twinkle, which was how she had gotten her name from Grandpa, and the dazzles sent diamonds across the ceiling. I had stopped in the doorway to the living room to watch her as she sparkled. She grinned at me impishly as she held her hands out for the warm beverage. It occurred to me how young she seemed. She was like a girl in her early 20s, in both appearance and mannerism. I wondered not for the first time if she would be that way when I was Grandpa's age. She patted the fireplace as she sat up, inviting me to sit with her, and I brought the hot cocoa to her as I leaned back against the rough stonework. Grandpa was sitting in his favorite chair, watching the two of us with a knowing smile. I appreciated him for that, more than he would ever know. It would have been easy for him to be hurt, but he always seemed to take the closeness of Glimmer and I as just one of life's little blessings. The widow had been very happy to have her cat back, and she thanked us for finding him quickly. "He's a silly old thing, but he's all I've got, and I'm quite fond of him. I'm glad he didn't wander off in the snow and get himself frozen to death." She had excused herself pretty quickly, telling Grandpa it looked like he was entertaining. She gave him a wink, and I'm not sure I understood it, and then she drove carefully down the driveway, Grandpa waving at her from the porch. The three of us settled in and got ready for Glimmer to begin her story, the fire the only light in the room. Glimmer took a sip of hot cocoa and made an appreciative noise as the warmth fell over her.
"That's good. We don't have anything quite that good in the woods."
"Are you telling me your civilization has existed since before settlers came from England, but you haven't figured out hot cocoa yet?" I asked with a little laugh. Glimmer gave me a withering look, but spoiled it by winking at me.
"We have sweets, of course, just nothing quite this frivolous exists in our world. We have more immediate concerns, like survival."
"And cats, apparently."
"Yes, and cats."
"Wait a minute," Grandpa said. "When I made you the wooden cat, you didn't seem so surprised."
"Well, I had seen wild cats before. They run everywhere in the forest. But this cat was different. He was so strange that I didn't immediately realize he was akin to the felines I knew."
She closed her eyes, and as the smoke wafted into her face, I could tell that she was time-traveling back to her girlhood days. Grandpa got that same look when he thought about the past, and I supposed it was universal. Glimmer was content to let the steam caress her for a few moments, beginning her story without much warning.
This was the time after Fisher's leaving. He had come to see me before he left, and he told me that he was going to fight in a war, that I have never fought in one. He said he would be gone for a long time, but that he hoped he would see me again. I didn't really understand, but I was upset at the thought of losing him. We had become close, and I didn't want to say goodbye. He told me this was something he had to do, but I didn't want to hear it. I told him to just go, that I didn't care if he came back or not, and turned away from him, so he wouldn't see the tears I was trying to hold back. When he said nothing, I turned back to find that I wasn't the only one failing to hold in my sorrow. I was used to seeing Fisher sad, but he had seemed different after his encounter with the bone collector. He told me this was a thing he had to do, and that getting away from the mountains for a while would be good for him. He wanted to see the world and grow into someone who could protect others. I refused to listen to his excuses though. I was young and spirited, and if he was going to leave, I told him to just go ahead and go. So we parted ways. I never knew if his sadness was as deep as mine, but it was several days before I was fit for much beyond moody turns. Life went on, though despite his advance, and many weeks later, I found myself in the woods again. Now, you may find it odd that I had never seen a cat before, but my people usually stay in the deep woods. I am considered an oddity because I will go so close to human places. In those days, I would not even go that far. Fisher had always come to visit me near the borders of my world and his, and without him to visit, I hadn't been anywhere near the humans in ages. On this particular day, I was supposed to be gathering herbs for medicine, so my mother could cure some of our people who had become ill. I had collected quite a few herbs, but when I found that I was close to the border again, I got a bit reminiscent of the times I had spent with Fisher. So I decided to go and have a look at some of the other people that live in the area. I didn't know any of them, but Fisher had talked about some of them. His parents, his grandmother that had passed on, some of his neighbors, and of the friends he often went out with, who I knew had been killed by the strange lights. I wasn't afraid of being seen by any of them. I could move as gracefully through the woods as any deer, and I had hidden from the humans before. So I took my sack and bow and decided to see what I could see. I was hopeful at the start, but it was not the grand adventure I thought it would. I saw human signs, old fires, and the waste they sometimes leave behind, but I encountered no people. I followed a trail to Fisher's old house, but I couldn't bring myself to get close. I missed him terribly, and the thought of seeing something that would remind me of him made me sad. I had turned around, preparing to head home again, when the strangest little creature stood in my path. His fur was the color of a campfire, with dark browns and dots of gray. His ears had a distinctly chewed look, and his paws were large and very furry. He held a magnificent tail behind him, and he had come up on me without a sound. I was startled at first, drawing my bow and challenging him, but he mewed good-naturedly and cocked his head as if to ask what I was doing. But when it became apparent that he meant me no harm, I put my weapon away and bent down to touch him. He was very soft, not bristly, like some of the other cats in the woods. He was a little muddy, but it was clear that someone was taking great care of him, farther than any cat I had ever seen, and he showed me none of the hesitancy around me that many of the forest creatures did. I sat and let him butt his head against my hand. My other hand glided along his silky fur, and when he came to sit in my lap, I giggled as he rumbled against my stomach. When I heard the sound of people returning to Fisher's old house, I realized I had been sitting there for a while. I had become enchanted with this little beastie, and as he walked back into the woods, I followed him eagerly. We spent the night in the forest, hunting mice and playing with the leaves and sticks that caught his attention. As the night went on, and the more time we spent together, the better I felt about Fisher leaving. We were cuddling in the boughs of a tree, when the first fingers of sunlight began to peek over the horizon. I realized I had been out all night with him, and when I picked him up and headed for home, I had every intention of taking him with me. As we walked back through the woods, I was confident that no one in my enclave would be seeing anything like this before. Some of them had cats, but nothing as grand as this one. One of my cousins had a beautiful spotted cat, and my older sister had a white one with red eyes, but their hair was short and coarse and nowhere near as luxurious as this fellow. I smiled to myself as I thought of the jealousy on their faces when they saw him. One's mother has touched his silky fur. There would be no way she couldn't turn it away. He would sleep next to my head at night, and I would drift off listening to the deep rumble of his purr. I was so involved with my daydream that I almost missed when he wiggled out of my arms. He had been riding along calmly until that point, purring against my side as the two of us walked. He looked back the way we could come and made that strange meow sound again. I was perplexed. Did he have a mate he needed to get back to? He started to walk away, but I picked him up again and tried to continue walking home. He wiggled out of my hands again though, and glanced back at me with remorse as he shook his little head. "What's wrong?" I asked. Don't you want to come home with me? In response, he started to walk off again. I took a step towards him, but I stopped myself before I could grab him up again. I turned around instead and headed for home, a little angry as I crunched through the underbrush. If he didn't want to come back with me, then so be it. I wouldn't force him. And the farther I got, the madder I became. Who cared if he didn't want to come back with me? I didn't need him. I had been fine before him, and I would be fine again. Let him wander off into the woods if that's what he wanted to do. Let him run afoul of a big mean coyote, or a hungry owl, or one of the bigger wildcats, or a snake, or... I wiped my eyes as they started to leak. The anger leaked out with them, and soon I was making my way back the way I had come. In my mind, I could really see him at the mercy of one of the coyote packs in the area or carried away by a hawk. He was a big fella, but wouldn't stand a chance against a pack of dogs. I wouldn't find him in time, I thought, or I would find him too late, or I would find nothing but a smear of blood and some of that gorgeous fur stuck in the pool. I swept at my eyes as the tears kept coming, already sure he was lost. The sky was pinkening through dawn still hours away, and when I heard him meow, I turned to find him cocking his head at me again. I laughed, scooping him into my arms and hugging him, and he wiggled and meowed in confusion. When I put him down again, he started walking the way we had come, and this time I followed him. I could see the light beginning to intrude on the dark world, but I didn't mind. Some members of my race cannot stand the light, but I have learned to love it. It stings my eyes and makes my skin burn a little, but I try to spend some time each day in the sun, knowing that my friends are part of that light world. That thin line on the horizon would have been enough to send both my parents scuttling back to the depths of the enclave, but I followed my new friend, evenly as he made his way. I expected I would find a little burrow of beasties like him, perhaps even some little ones with a mate who would be worried. But as we got closer to the edges of humanity, I realized where he was heading. When we came to the edge of his home, the lights already on the big house. He looked back at me, much the same way I had looked at him on the border of my world. What? Don't you want to come with me? That look said, but I shook my head at him. No, this is where we must part ways, little friend. He came back, butting up against my leg and giving me another rub of his silky fur, and then he trotted off for home, bounding up in the back porch steps as he sat patiently at the door. I had turned to leave, the dawn very close now, when a high and excited voice found its way to my ear. Clarence, you came back! I peeked through the trees and saw a little girl pulling him into her arms. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, and as she rubbed her face against the cats, I realized this had been where he was returning to. She was his family. She was the one had been trying to get back to, and I felt a little guilty for trying to keep him. He had home already, and my ownership of him had been a knack of death. I told Mommy you wouldn't come back. I'm sorry I put you outside yesterday while I was trying to nap. I won't do it again. Come on, let's get you some breakfast. Then we can brush you and get you. But their plans were cut off by the closing door. And as the day began, I slipped back into the woods and made my day as home as well.
The fire crackled as she finished, and I saw a tear roll down her cheek as she remembered that day.
I think in a way that was how I said goodbye to you as well, Fisher.
To me? Grandpa smiled.
You were never mine to keep either. I felt hurt when you left, that I didn't admit it. You were gone, and I thought I could simply exist without you. Watching that cat go, realizing that it might get hurt and feeling hurt that it wouldn't stay, made me remember how you had left as well. I needed to come to terms with that, which helped a lot.
We all sat silently for a while, Glimmer putting her head on my shoulder as the fire crackled merrily behind us. When Grandpa chuckled suddenly, I looked up and saw Glimmer cock a sardonic eye at him. "I had to get a cat out of the widow's house once. She didn't know it was a cat, of course. She thought it was a haint that had taken up residence in her attic. So there I am, prepared to do battle with a dark spirit, and I step into the attic and find myself face to face with a highly upset bobcat." Glimmer's hand slipped into mine as the two of us listened and laughed as Grandpa unfurled his tale of a spirited wild animal and a very surprised Grandpa. We sat by the fire as the snow came down, and the fire warmed our bones. I could feel Glimmer's comfortable weight as she leaned against me, and as Grandpa unveiled his latest story, I smiled, enjoying these small blessings as they came. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story and another Appalachian Grandpa tale. I just thought I'd pop in and stray away from my usual ending to thank Dama de Blanca, tonight's special guest narrator, who basically read my whole story for me. Thanks so much. She's such a dear friend to the show, and it's always an honor to have her reprise her role as Glimmer. If this is your first time joining us in the Appalachian countryside, never fret. You can catch up on all the Grandpa stories in our playlist of Appalachian Grandpa stories. There's, wow, quite a few. More than I realized there were. So, if you're not caught up, why not go have a look? I've got them all ordered there by release date. Before we go, let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor, and thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. It's always such a treat to wake up and see in my inbox that another contributor has signed on. If you think you might like to sponsor the show in a more monetary way, come on down to Patreon. For just $10 a month, you can have a book anytime I write one, signed and on your doorstep. But if that's not quite your style, we have many other tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that'll suit you. But for tonight, this is Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.